Okay, the host started the webinar. Megan, will you go ahead and call the roll, please?
Regent Walsh.
Here.
Regent Bogus.
Here.
Regent Atwell.
Here.
Regent Bechtel. Regent Jones. Regent Manydeeds.
Here.
Regent Miller.
Here.
Regent Rye.
Here.
And Regent Weatherly.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Very good. Are there any conflicts of interest with items on today's open session agenda? Seeing none, we're ready to move forward. Our first item today is a recommendation to reorder and amend the bylaws of the board. Just as a reminder, the executive committee's recommendation will need to be approved by the full board at our December meeting. And we'll start with Megan giving us an overview.
Yeah, so I want to start by thanking Olivia Woodmansey, who during her time in the board office this past year did a great deal of background work on the history and proposed revisions to these bylaws. I also want to thank Quinn Williams and Jennifer Lattis in our Office of General Counsel for their assistance in reviewing the suggested changes. As noted in the materials, the board's bylaws were created in 1971 following the merger of the University of Wisconsin and Wisconsin State Universities. And a great deal of the structure and language from those original bylaws is retained in the current version. Over the last 50 years, as changes and additions have been made, a lot of language has been added to the ends of sections or the document. So part of the proposed amendments today are to reorganize the bylaws just to improve readability and to eliminate some of the repetitive language that's been added over the years. Also making some modifications to standardize terms, make updates throughout the document. We're also proposing to make some additions to the language that would codify current practices, including referring to board membership and the statutes that pertain to that. Same for when it's appropriate for the board to move into closed session. And just noting that the bylaws are subordinate to state code. Some slightly more substantive changes that are proposed are a requirement for committee charters, laying out what the duties and focuses of the committees would be. My expectation is that something that we would develop over the coming weeks and months with the committee staff and committee chairs. And those would be reviewed each year at the board's annual. We're also adding some language, codifying what the executive committee's duties and powers are. Specifically, the proposed language would note the limits of the executive committee's authority, noting that the board reserves the power to select or terminate the system president, to elect board officers, to make any changes to the university's mission, to make amendments to the bylaws or changes to administrative code, and to approve annual budgets or biennial budget requests. The final substantive change included in this document is making a change for consistency in the current bylaws, suspending the bylaws on a one-time basis requires a 2/3 majority vote, but just amending the bylaws permanently requires a simple majority vote. Just for consistency, we would advise changing that to a 2/3 threshold for either suspensions or permanent amendments. So those are the high-level summaries of these proposed changes. It's anticipated that additional amendments to the bylaws would come following further review by the board office and general counsel's office. For example, The sections relating to the two appeals committees include quite a bit of language about appeals processes, which might be better placed in board policy. So we'll continue to look at these bylaws over the next year. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
So you may recall that the last year Drew was president, he did appoint a governance committee, and this work was tasked to the governance committee. But since we decided to retask it to the executive committee, that's why the information at this level of detail has come down to this group. Are there questions for Megan? Wait, before I think we need a motion to adopt resolution C to reorder and amend the bylaws. May I have a motion?
So moved, Ryan.
A second?
Second, any deeds.
Okay, very good. All right, questions, thoughts, discussion?
Well, I think it makes sense to do this, to streamline it, to make it consistent, to better state what the mission is in each area. One thing that I have a question about is ready. Is this going to continue to be a committee, or is it something that would be better served if the whole board would hear these presentations at the meeting rather than having a committee? Because I think we miss a lot by not being on that committee.
Yeah, and that's actually our item D, Ed. You're jumping ahead a little bit. We are going to talk about the future of the Ready Committee, but that's okay.
All right, that's fine. I can wait till then.
You can wait.
So Karen, the action on the Ready Committee, the action on item D is not, I just want to make sure, when we act on the bylaws as presented, does that change the status of the Ready Committee, or that's a subsequent action?
So
Yeah,
I'll note that the bylaws document before you still has the Ready Committee as a committee. I've highlighted the language that makes reference to the Ready Committee, just because it is going to be the subject of the next item on today's agenda. So depending on the results of our discussion in a few minutes, we could make additional changes to this bylaws proposal. But as the first item on today's agenda, this would retain the Ready Committee without any changes.
So
I hope helps clear.
incorporating, Megan, if we just made the decision to incorporate the Ready Committee functions into the broader board, then we would have to further amend the bylaws, right?
If during your next item, you decide that you want to disband the Ready Committee, we would incorporate those additional changes before sending this to the board in December.
But then we'd have to act on, the committee would have to act on the approval of the amended, right? I mean, it's a procedural question at this point.
Yeah.
We want to
Yes.
go into the discussion of D before we act on the resolution that's been moved and seconded.
Yeah.
Does that seem like is that okay, Megan?
Yeah, we can either do this as two motions by the committee, one to approve the bylaws proposal as included here, and then a second one on additional changes related to Ready. Or if you prefer, we can leave this motion on the table and move into the Ready discussion and then make additional changes before acting on this one.
Bob, I don't know what you think about this, but I would think maybe going to the Ready item first. I think we're ready to talk about that, and then we can go back and make any additional changes to this resolution C. Does that sound workable?
Yeah, I would if I could presume to suggest to the chair of the meeting that just maybe clarify if there are other items in the bylaws other than the status of the Ready Committee that people want to have discussion on, and then let's have the Ready discussion.
Okay.
Have one motion.
Sounds good. So related to resolution C, the amending and reordering of the bylaws, sans Ready Committee, are there any questions or comments on those items? So hearing none, Megan, are we to vote now on C or table? Amy?
Quick question. Is there something in the bylaws because they haven't been reviewed since 1971? Is that right? To review?
Parts of them have been, it's been
Right.
like a remodeling project on a really old house. So,
I was just curious. I can't remember if there's anything in there to have, any kind of timeline for review going into the future.
uh-huh.
I don't know if there is or not. Megan, do you?
Any what?
A timeline for, further
Oh.
future review as we go, ahead and realize, there's a lot of times where we realize that the bylaws are antiquated and we,
Yeah.
put it on a list. So
Well, this process that Megan and Jess and the region office started this summer is essentially to get at that and make it more of a continuous process so that one group of people isn't just assigned to sit there and fix the bylaws. So we're going to do it gradually. So,
Okay.
At future exec committees, there may be one or two bylaw items along with some of the other business that we have to do. So yeah, it's a continuous process. And we should have been doing that for a while, but now we're kind of righting that ship. Ashok, did you have a question?
No, I was going to move to table my earlier motion so we can discuss item D.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor of tabling, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we're going to table that and move on to resolution D, the Ready Committee. And so the Ready Committee's been on pause, as you know, the last few months following Dave Bruckhart's retirement. And during this time, we've had the discussions occur, panels, that sort of thing at the full board meeting. And that's been something I think a number of regents have commented to me that they liked being able to hear these things. And I know a couple of times when I sat in on a Ready Committee meeting, the information is pretty interesting. And so it seemed like maybe we were ready to move and have it be part of the full board, but this group needs to consider that first. And to help us along the way, I've asked Jeff Brandt to join us and talk about some of the feedback from this.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So we've received some really positive feedback, I think, from individual regents who are really excited to see these topics come up. I also feel like when we bring somebody in and bring them before the full board, they seem to be really excited about that. I think the idea of being in front of the full board has some prestige to it. I also thought I'd give you a little bit of a preview of what Jack and I and others are cooking up for the next year to show you how we can keep bringing these topics to the forefront. So in December, we'll have an update on the Dairy Hub that probably would have gone to Ready in previous years. We'll have them present all the work being done there to the full board. These are going to be industry folks that are going to come in and speak to the benefits of it. In March, we're going to have research in the Rotunda, kind of be a big focus of the meeting when we're talking about student research. In February, we're looking at maybe updating the economic impact study that we did in 2019. That would be a topic there as well. In Milwaukee, entrepreneurship is going to be one of our themes. So we really are trying to build this topic in. I think it's a big topic for us down the street. It's a big topic for us with our partners as we start meeting with our business leaders. So we want to make it a kind of one of the star presentations of the board meeting, every board meeting, something along those lines. And it's a really wide ranging area, to go from research to innovation and everything in between. But we think we can cover it. And we also think it gives a chance for each campus as their host to really kind of shine in front of the full board, which is always good for always well received by the chancellors. So that's what we're looking at. I'm happy to answer any questions about, ways we can do this differently. But that's what we've kind of been planning. I've got a couple more too, but I thought I'd start with those.
Karen,
You're on mute.
Questions or comments for Jeff?
I have
Yeah,
a comment. I hate to admit this, but I was on the Bradley committee in 2011, 2012 that came up with this proposal regarding Ready. And I think that what Jeff has just described is what the intent of that group was 10 years ago. And it somehow changed over the years and became just a committee's job to hear these wonderful presentations. And then just a summary of what was given to the board. The intent of the committee was to show the state and each part of the state what each campus and what the system was doing for the state to kind of hype us up a little bit and give us some exposure and get our partners excited about what campuses were doing. So that's what that committee wanted this Ready committee to be. Exactly how it evolved is not what it was supposed to be initially. So it doesn't really fit within the committees that we have on education and those other things. This is something that we intended, or at least I think we intended, the entire board to hear and the state to hear at our meetings.
Okay.
I
Bob?
guess I'd offer a few comments as
Yes.
the presumptively last chair of the committee if we act in accordance with the recommendation. First of all, I don't oppose the recommendation. I think it's sort of a trade-off between allowing more people longer exposure at a committee level or really highlighting the major things at the full board. And I think there's an argument for both of those things. What I'm doing here is I'm talking on both sides of the issue so that
I see that.
Bob, you want a job? I mean,
I thought as I think of the Ready committee during my tenure, like everything else to do with the university, the highlight of the time that I had on the committee was seeing the scholar awards and hearing with granularity from the people actually doing things on the actual campuses, including the one we were visiting. And I think the committee afforded greater time for them to all sort of speak to their experience and their accomplishments. And so when I think of the good part of it, of the committee, that's it. There's no question that the committee compared to the education committee or finance or business and finance or capital, there was just, I don't know that we ever really brought any actions to the Board of Regents. So it was sort of it's sort of non-substantive from an action point of view, or at least it has been. I do think there was some important dialogue, but I don't know where it'll find its place. There was at least an effort to have conversations among the various entities, university and state related, who are sort of have an oar in the water with respect to economic development. So for example, what's the role of WISIS? What's the role of WARF? What's the role of, the Crow Center weighs in on economic development issues. And then of course at a state level, you have WEDC and other regional things, and you have the tech schools. So I don't know where that conversation about the university's role and all of those things. And I thought, and I still think there's an important discussion to be had about, there's a difference between commercializing intellectual property generated at universities and actually trying to do that in a way that is creates sustainable economic development. It's one thing to take an idea and say, how in 3 years can I turn it into cash? It's another idea it's another and a much more extensive and granular and human process to try to build something that'll still be here 10 or 20 years from now. At least I saw that as an important conversation for the Ready committee to have a role in. It frankly didn't really happen. And I could make the universal observation that COVID sort of interrupted those kind of things. With all that said, I think we just need to recognize that when we say we're going to afford greater exposure to the worthy things that previously got discussed at Ready at the full board meetings are very packed, and you're going to wind up having a lot of things that just fall off and fewer people involved. So just let's recognize if we go forward with disbanding the Ready committee, that something will be lost. But overall, I think, having talked to both sides of the issue, I'm supportive of the recommendation. So.
Okay, comments on Bob's comments? Amy?
I think that's a really important point that I don't think I thought through that well, Bob. So thank you very much for that. I think there is value to really getting granular about some of these topics. And I would hate to see this. I agree that it should be brought to the full board, but I would hate some of this to just kind of fall by the wayside, not have anybody, keeping track and taking account of those issues that we do need to follow up with, or really getting down into it and just saying, that's great. Yeah, let's see what happens. And, so I'm not sure if there's a way to do without the Ready Committee to keep some kind of tabs on, and the meetings are really full and everyone,
Yeah.
they show their best, and that's great, but to have discussion would be really key with this too. So it's kind of a tough one, how we do both.
Yeah.
I feel like the model for when the new order, if we decide to disband the Ready Committee, the model really was, I think, the presentation we had up in Eau Claire with that panel discussion. I thought that was just terrific. And it was so good that the entire board got to hear that. So if that helps us connect with a smaller number of people, then, I think Bob and Amy are onto something that we need to be aware, especially without Dave there, Jeff, to kind of have it his full-time focus. And maybe one way to do this would be to say, okay, for now, we're going to eliminate the Ready Committee. But if at some point we find, as Bob said, there are too many things dropping off the table, we don't have enough review of WISIS or other things like that, entrepreneurship, that sort of thing, then maybe we need to consider another entity, maybe similar to Ready. And we would certainly be open to that, I think. The question is, for now, are we comfortable sitting here with one less committee?
This is Kyle. If I can just add that I am 100% on board. Well, I'm not 100% on board, but I understand the arguments, and I sort of where Bob is that yeah, let's do it in front of the whole board. But that's the highlighting purpose of it. For me, the real opportunity is actually the oversight. We have significant portions of the state's SBA sitting at UW system, but I don't know if any region understands what they're doing. How are they going to all corners of the state? How are they fulfilling the Wisconsin idea? But it sits in the UW system.
Yeah.
Same thing with research that we're doing, right? Like, I don't think it's the worst idea to have a bunch of regions understanding what research, in depth, what we're doing from an oversight perspective. Not necessarily that we have control over that, but I'd really like to have a group of regions understand the parts of, I'll take the acronyms of it, like the research that we're doing, and not just the highlights that we get from the university of Madison's doing $1.3 billion, but like what's the nuts and bolts of this research? What's not working, particularly at the other 12 campuses? Within economic development, we already have SBA sitting within us, but also what are the other 13 schools doing, both students and faculty, to go out into the community and make sure that we're part of that community and part of the broader Wisconsin? And I mean, I can't think of a way for innovation because it sort of goes on the other two. But for me, the foregone opportunity would be our ability to do oversight the things that we're doing that I think are important.
Okay.
If I could just follow in on Kyle a little bit. One of my concerns as I thought about all these topics was, Madison has a tremendous amount of research, but it's very public sector oriented. And it seems like our market share across the system, but particularly at Madison with respect to privately funded research, is much lower than the stature of the university would I guess, suggest. And so one of the topics that I was interested in Ready perhaps was not of sufficient stature to be a forum to address it. But why are we lagging on private sector research? What is it about? What are the 4 or 5 campuses that seem to be really lighting it up around the country that we could and should be part of? And so what's preventing us? What's preventing us from being more like Stanford or more like wherever? And I don't know that Ready was the place to bury that discussion. I just don't know where it happens.
Yeah. And that's a topic, Bob, during the Madison Chancellor hire that came up for discussion pretty frequently is how can we turn that around at our flagship? And then we need to also, you're right, get down to the layers below that tell us, what the other campuses are doing. It's tough to keep track of all that. Jeff, I don't know if you can shed any light on, is Dave's position going to be replaced? Who's being tasked with these things now?
Yeah, so first off, we are going to replace Dave's position. It will not be an associate vice president. We're going to take it to a director level.
Okay.
And they're going to be a little more on the ground with businesses and economic development groups. And not having the committee responsibility, to be quite honest, frees the person up. Dave probably spent 40% of his job, at least, running the committee. So having them being able to be out in the field, talking to people more, I think is our goal.
Right.
And we're gonna post that soon. I've just got to finalize a couple pieces here. So that's number one. Who's being tasked with it now is pretty much me. Like we're kind of triaging it and making sure we're talking to people. Jay and I have been doing the business meetings. I've been the liaison with WDC and WMC for a while now. And so I think what I'm hearing, and I think it's a really good conversation, is the research piece in particular. Madison, I know, wants to do more, and I think they'd say that we have policies both at system and at the state that prohibit them from doing more with private sector.
Yeah.
So that would be something like business and finance. We've asked for a package before. I know Jess in the past, we worked with Madison, like give us some policy changes, either legislative or whatever. We'll run with them if they're valuable. So I think that can still be reported out. But I think it's incumbent on us at system admin to make sure that we have the WDC maybe needs to be before the board once a year. So that we know there's the WISIS report. Once we're finalized with the updated WISIS agreement, that should maybe come to the full board and we can have that, that's where that conversation has to happen. I know we wrestled with this for a long time. I mean, Olivia, who she mentioned earlier, Olivia and I had 7 different versions of what Ready would look like if we decided to keep it and formalize it. But, so I think it's going to be on us to make sure we bring the stuff up to the full board. And then as necessary, maybe the chair has to appoint a task force to look at research and get a couple of regions to be, and you can do those as one-offs almost, where you guys spend the next 6 months doing some research on this topic and bring a proposal to the board to help to work on it. You could do something like that too.
I think that could actually be much more constructive than having that issue buried in a committee that really doesn't have the authority to push into it. An ad hoc committee or a task force appointed by the president. A particular issue we talked about with private sector research is maybe more of a Madison issue than, I mean, I don't want to dismiss Milwaukee's presence as an R1 or any of the other good things that go on, but the preponderance of that shortfall is at a Madison. But Karen, I presume the bylaws, Karen, would permit you to say, here's a defined scope of an issue. I want an ad hoc committee to address and report back within a certain time frame. That's probably more effective than trying to keep Ready alive.
I like that idea, Megan. I assume the bylaws allow for that. Okay.
Yes.
Ashok or John, one of you had your hand up. I saw to the corner of my eye.
That was me. I was basically asking the question about going to ask the question about whether there would be a staff member. So it was answered.
Okay. Okay. All right. Any other discussion related to the Ready Committee? So we are now on resolution. Is it C? No, it's resolution D, Megan. Is that correct?
No resolution in the materials for this. We weren't presuming where discussion would end up. So
Okay.
there are some suggested additional bylaws changes in
Okay.
materials for the Ready discussion. It would mean if we are disbanding the Ready Committee,
Okay.
those additional bylaws changes would remove references to the Ready Committee, and in order to maintain membership of the executive committee at 9 members, one of which currently is the Ready Committee chair. We would instead change the number of members, additional members appointed by the board president from 1 to 2. So maintaining the overall number of members.
And so do I need a motion to dissolve the Ready Committee? Is that what
if you want to take a vote on whether to include those changes in the overall package of bylaws amendments.
Okay,
We
So
could take,
really, what we probably need is an amendment to the motion that was tabled.
yeah,
Right? We need to resume or detableize the tabled and then introduce a resolution to amend it to incorporate the changes to the bylaws that would effectively dissolve the Ready Committee.
and Ashok is ready to dive right into that. I can,
Go ahead and move to continue the discussion on the previous motion, adding to it the changes proposed in front of us regarding the Ready Committee.
So you're introducing an amendment to your motion.
Yep.
I'll second that.
okay, any discussion of the amended motion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of, yes, Ashok?
Oh, yeah, no, I actually have now that we can talk about all the bylaws under this motion, I do have a question.
Okay,
Um,
sure.
You know, and I'm looking through the bylaws and I know this exists and I'm trying to understand how the reporting structure comes up to the full board when we have regents serving on other boards on the behalf of this board. So, for example, Quinn, don't worry, I won't talk about the one I'm conflicted from. But let's take WARF, for example.
Yeah,
Or URP, for example. There are regents appointed, I think, by the president of the.
not to the WARF board, to the University Research Park.
Okay,
Board,
we'll
yes.
take URP for one. There's the one I'm
Hospital,
conflicted from.
UW Hospital and Clinic
That one
Authority.
I'm
is
not supposed to
another one.
talk about, you know.
I can
those.
say it, yeah.
How does that flow into, because essentially, from what I understand, they are representing us as a board to that board. And how does that information flow back to our board, or when there is controversy, how do we get engaged or not engaged? You know, for example, the one that I'm conflicted from right now is definitely in the press and in the courts right now.
Mhm.
And we have, I believe it's you, Amy, you know, we have somebody representing all of us on that board. So
Mhm.
say it was URP in the middle of a legal battle right now.
Yeah,
How does that flow into the regular board discussions and actions? Or does it, I'm trying to figure that out within the bylaws and I don't see it. So Quinn, maybe you can help me too.
so I think I'll take a stab at answering that, and then Megan had her hand up also. So generally, these folks don't report back to the full board. So for example, John Miller and Jill Underly, who sit on the VOTEC board, do not come back and report to us. Mike Jones, Amy, and myself, who sit on the Hospital Authority board, again, do not report back. Kyle is our rep on the Research Park board, and again, he doesn't. I think their presence there, and I can't say much historically, but my impression has always been that they're really just there to listen. And we're like, I don't consider myself a full active member of the hospital board to the extent that I would if I wasn't also a regent. I feel I'm there to ask questions based on, you know, my role as a regent and our role as a board. And, you know, for example, when the union stuff came before the hospital board, there was no report back to the Board of Regents because the decisions that are being made by the hospital board. I hope that clarifies. Go ahead.
Actually, it creates more confusion for me now.
Okay,
Do you all vote on the boards that you're on?
we do vote. We do. We have votes.
Then
We're
you-
not ex officio, and that is true. John, that is true of the VOTEC board as well, right? You are voting.
Correct, we vote. One thing to note is the Board of Regents reports to the Technical College Board in a summary every meeting, but as you mentioned, we don't do the opposite back.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's,
I guess is creating more questions for me, and maybe I'll
Mhm.
get some legal advice here, but if we have people on the behalf of the Board of Regents now acting as fiduciaries on other boards because they do vote, then I would assume that there would need to be some sort of tie back to the board, given the overall responsibility is you're there representing the region board. am I off base, guys? I mean, I'm just trying to figure this out. And let's take, I mean, obviously the union issue is a big issue
Yeah.
right now, and it's hugely political and going through the courts. And we have 3 members of our board that are voting
Mhm.
on that board, or URP, for example, or VOTEC, and
Mhm.
that's great. And like I said, I don't want to get too much in the hospital one because obviously I'd be in conflict, but it's situations like that that when we're cleaning up or modernizing our bylaws, I'm
Mhm.
wondering where that fits in.
Megan, did you had your hand up?
Yeah, to speak to Regent Miller's point, the Wisconsin Technical College System submits a report to our board. It appears on our agendas, kind of top of the agenda, where we say, you know, this has been shared with the regents. And if you have any comments, feel free to make them here. Our board also submits a report like that to the Technical College System. I know that in the past, I have seen in board minutes that we've had similar exchanges of reports for ECB, the Educational Communications Board, or HEAB. Not in recent years, but it's something that's happened on and off in past decades. I don't think we've ever formalized it in bylaws or anything like that.
Quinn, did you have anything to weigh in terms of, I think Ashok is alluding to, are there legalities since we have regents acting as fiduciaries on behalf of the board on other boards?
Yeah, I would say that each one of those relationships is specified either statutorily or by the specific agreement we have with that board. So each one has its own flavor, Regent Rye. Some of them have very specific responsibilities with respect to report out. Some of them are more flexible, and those are based on the specific nature of those relationships. As you note, there's a fiduciary relationship that board members have to the overall board. The Board of Regents, that is the primary fiduciary responsibility. To the extent that there is a conflict with that subsidiary fiduciary, the board always trumps, and I think you know that in your particular instance. So that's my short input on that, sir.
Okay.
I want to weigh in on what Ashok is saying. Ashok, I understand what you're saying. Apart from what the bylaws and the legal and the bylaws and the relationship and separate agreements, it seems odd that we would appoint regents to act as fiduciaries on those boards with no sort of specified reporting back to the full board as to what their activities are. It sounds like additional work, but I agree with your point, Ashok. It seems odd.
And I'd say 99% of the time, it's probably not ever come up because it's not, those generally, they don't have a whole lot of controversy going on. But VOTEC could. I mean, obviously the future of the technical colleges and its intersection with our 2-year schools and conflict and all of that obviously is an example of what could come up. What's going on with UW Health is definitely, national right now. But even the URP relationship and the flow of funds that we're designing with the new real estate deals, obviously the fiduciary responsibility as a regent trumps that, but how are we managing that relationship if it's not in the bylaws? And sometimes when it's not in writing and everybody just, this is how we normally do it. And it is in writing in individual statutes, as Quinn pointed out, and I was aware of that. But we haven't set an expectation as a board of those representatives. And we have to kind of take off the individuals who are currently doing it and think about 10 years from now, who's going to be doing it, or 5 years from now. Yeah. What are we setting as, and if we are going to revise our bylaws, is this an opportunity to set expectations?
Yeah. Amy.
I think that's really an excellent point, because I know that John goes to all the VOTEC meetings. It's a lot of work. So I don't think it's, I don't want to, I think Bob said, I don't want to add work, but it would be nice if there are, to just inform the other regions, a small report. I don't know if it's every board meeting, just like a 5-minute summation. I don't know if that's possible, but when I was on the education media board, there are really amazing things happening. And I just thought, this is weird because I'm just there on the board. The regions don't have any clue what's happening. it's just something to think about to put in the bylaws. Maybe, I don't know, how would we focus it, narrow it down to not every meeting, but to me, it would be nice to have some summary. And I know it's there somewhere. You could probably find it somewhere, Megan. But I don't think the other regions that are not on some of these committees have any idea what's happening. So.
Right, and you'd almost have to read the paper. The one concern I would have, and this is probably more true of the hospital and clinic authority than of, say, the URP, but there are a number of things discussed in closed session that I think, Quinn, help me out here. I think we'd have to be very careful there what we discussed with the regents who aren't on the hospital authority.
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, if it's a closed session of the URP board or the hospital board, they would not be able to report an open session to us. I mean, I think
Right.
that's, I think.
And I'm not looking for that level, but I am worried about, the unintended consequences. For
Yeah.
example, you listed off 2 boards I didn't know existed.
Mhm.
Like I didn't know they existed until, so does every regent know that 3 regents sit on the hospital board, or 1 regent or 2 regents sit on VOTEC? And if maybe I missed that in a meeting, or I missed that in orientation, or I didn't read it close enough. But then if I was ever asked about, say, the technical colleges, technically I should really stay mum on that, because the board I serve on has a fiduciary serving on that board, and should stay mum on any kind of comment, even offhand, on the technical colleges, unless it's talked about at a board level. So, I worry about some of the unintended consequences. Megan's got her hand up, so I'm sorry, Megan.
Yeah, everybody gets every year, usually in July, a list of the committee members, and then a list of the outside boards where we're represented, a list of the awards committees of the regions. Megan.
Yeah, so I look for my name.
I was just going to mention that committee list where we have our other appointments included. Just for reference, that's the Educational Communications Board has a regent member. The Higher Educational Aids Board has a regent member appointed by the governor. The Hospital Authority Board has 3 regent members. The Research Park Board has 1 regent member. The Wisconsin Partnership Program has a regent liaison, and we hear a report from that program every year in December. The Wisconsin Technical College System Board has 1 member appointed from our board, and then obviously their president serves on our board. And then we have a liaison to the Association of Government Boards, that's AGB. They don't meet, but we have a appointed liaison just to establish a relationship with them.
We could add language that that the region president, in consultation with the system staff, shall determine if periodic reports from regents appointed by to these boards, I'm searching for the right words, but
Yeah.
basically Karen, in consultation with system staff, could determine if it's appropriate, or you could specify at least annually, a report on the activities of the related the boards to which we appoint regents. We could do that.
It could even be in a consent agenda. I mean, we could all read it on our own instead
Yeah.
of time of an hour of a meeting, but I just think that if we do have, once again, that tie responsibility, especially for some of the more significant ones where we're not liaison, where we are voting members,
Mhm.
then, this is an opportunity where we review our bylaws. Maybe we do it at the next meeting, that we add that amendment in there, but it is something that I think that we should, at least from my perspective, like Bob was saying, somewhat codify in the bylaws.
Yeah, Ed, you had your hand up.
I do. I think this is something where I would like a legal opinion from Quinn. When we're sitting here talking about things that are unintended consequences of our actions on being liaisons or being appointed to boards. And I don't really know the answer to that. And I think certainly this must have come up in other areas of the country, and we should have some guidelines as to what we should or shouldn't do. I don't remember this ever being a problem, but it could, I suppose.
Yeah.
And maybe I just don't think about these things to the extent that some other people do. But when you start talking about it, you can see where
Yeah.
something could happen that would result in us having to know about it, and we
Yeah.
have someone on that board. So that's all I'm saying. You may benefit from that opinion, and maybe then we can put it in our policy.
Yeah. It sounds like this is something that maybe we need a little more time with for the region office and for general counsel's office to gather some information for us and lay out some options for the next meeting of the executive committee. Does that sound like a workable solution there? Okay, thank you for bringing that up, Ashok. I think it's a very good question, and you will see this again before this committee. Okay, backing up. Megan, are we voting now on resolution C?
I believe
As-
the motion on the,
amended.
yep, the motion on the table is to approve the resolution C, including the additional amendments related to the Ready Committee.
Okay,
call the
and we had a
question.
second, correct? All right. Any more discussion? All right, all in favor of resolution C as amended, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Very good. All right. So we will see that. And, Megan, feel free to, as part of that research, it might be good to talk to each individual regent who serves on these external boards, just to find out the scope of what they do and get their ideas about what's practical or what the board most might want to see. That's a very different question for the hospital board folks who meet every month as it is for Research Park, which Kyle, I think, is still quarterly, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, all right.
It is.
Okay, that will conclude our open session agenda. May I have a motion to move into closed session to consider a recommendation for the employment of an executive director and corporate secretary, Office of the Board of Regents, as permitted by S 19851 and C of the Wisconsin statutes? May I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a
Second.
second? Okay, we need a roll call vote. Megan, please.
Regent Walsh,
Yes.
Regent Bogus,
Yes.
Regent Atwell,
Yes.
Regent Bechtel, Regent Jones, Regent Manydeeds,
Yes.
Regent Miller,
Yes.
Regent Rye,
Yes.
and Regent Weatherly.
Yes.
Okay. Let me know when we're clear, please.
Yes, Stephen, can you please lock the meeting?
Absolutely.
Okay, and I'm going to ask Megan, Stephen, and Kristen to either ring off or mute their phone, please, their sound.